What if we created a place where doctors, politicians, chefs, and farmers come together to rethink how we eat, live, and heal? NutriVention at Buchinger, Wilhelmi.
Hello everyone, welcome to your English course for today. So I'm gonna give you an overview about microbiomes. So going from the soils to the plants, the fruits, to our gut microbiome, other microbiomes we have in our body, and also giving you an idea of what are the health implications. And when I talk about microbiomes, I like to always start by the big picture that we are actually ecosystems. We always think about only our cells, our DNA in medicine. This is how pharmacology and our modern medicine is built. But we are actually an ecosystem of human cells and bacteria. And this piece of art that you see here, this is actually very revealing because this is an artist which she took the bacteria from her skin with a cotton bud, and then she made this groove on a representation of her face where bacteria can grow. And this is actually what you see here is what you see here is actually the normal diversity which is on her face and which is amplified in this case. And we have all bacteria, fungi growing on our faces, on every organ that we have in our body. And this is actually, when you look, we have more bacteria than human cells. They are a bit outnumbering the human cells. But what is the most important here is that they have actually much more genes, much more genetic diversity than us. And these bacteria which are in our gut, they can do a lot for our health. And when we talk about the microbiome, we generally talk about the bacteria because this is what we can see the most, but there's many other microorganisms, fungi, viruses, and other animals living in our intestines. And when you look at the number of bacteria, here 38 with 12 zeros behind that, then we have 10 times more viruses in our gut, and we start to understand their role. We start to understand that they shape the bacteria abundance because they are predators of bacteria. In our gut, the viruses are in constant war with the bacteria, and we start to understand that this can have influences on our health, because if these viruses start attacking some of the good guys, you can have an onset in inflammatory disease. And these bacteria, like I was telling you, they can do a lot of things because they have a lot of diversity. And when they produce some small molecules which are absorbed by the gut and by the bloodstream, this can travel to every organ, and this can travel to the brain, the liver. And this actually explains why, when you look at the state of science, every disease, every organ is known to be influenced by the microbiome. It's more difficult to find something which is not influenced by the microbiome than the other way around. And when you look at this picture, you can also see that it can also influence our brain. And when you look at the influence of our brain, this is also shaping our behavior to the point that you can even wonder if we are totally ourselves, because when you look at scientific studies from the young age, we are influenced by our bacteria, by our viruses in the gut. And in this study, some scientists from the University of Turku, they looked at the bacteria microbiome in the gut of babies, and they could predict what would be the temperament of these babies. So in this case, it's not complex traits. We are talking about the baby smiling more or crying more, but they could predict from their microbiome what character they would develop. So you can imagine that it is really shaping us during our whole life. And when we think about the microbiome, often we think about it like if it's like an homogeneous soup that we have in the gut, that it's one picture, but actually this is really a moving picture. The microbiome is changing a lot. What you can see here, this is like looks very complex. This is lots of colors, lots of lines. And what you see here is actually the microbiome of one person over the course of a year. And you have 100, 200, 300 days, and all these colors and these gaps means that it is moving a lot. One bacteria, 1 week you detect it, the other week you don't detect it. And it's because our microbiome is heavily influenced by our lifestyle, and in this case, heavily influenced by our food. This is the most common determinant of our microbiome, because these bacteria in our guts, they are mostly fed by what we eat. And so we are shaping them by what we eat. And if you eat, for instance, plant-rich diet, you would favor some populations of bacteria. If you eat a lot of meat, you would favor other populations. And there are some scientific studies which were done to show how quick this happened, because if you switch some people from a plant-based diet to an animal-based diet, you switch the microbiome in a matter of hours, because actually the bacteria in your gut which likes the fiber, if you eat a plant-based diet, they will grow, and the other one which more ferment amino acids from meat, they will tend to die. And this is really a very quick moving picture that we have in our gut. And to understand the role of the microbiome and how it can be shaping our health, I also like to take a step back and look from the point of view of a scientist about what happens with evolution. Because we have evolved with these bacteria in our gut for millions of years, and the question can be why? Are they infecting us? Are they just passengers? But actually, we have symbiosis with these bacteria, and they can bring us new functions. And if you look, for instance, why the Japanese populations can digest more easily some product like algae, which is entering in the composition of Japanese cuisine, the nori, you can see that actually these populations have some specific bacteria in their guts. And these bacteria, before, they were just dwelling in the sea, feeding on these algae. And by eating the algae with the bacteria growing on it, then some bacteria, maybe they like it in the gut, they will stay there and they will help with the digestion. And so that's how we can get new physiological function very quickly by taking some bacteria from our environment. And if you look, doesn't work. If you look at wildlife, you can see that it can be actually vital for some animals, because this rodent, for instance, is known to feed on a specific bush which contains a very toxic molecule, and only this animal can feed on this bush in this area, which is really a great selective advantage. And if this animal can feed on this bush, it is because it has also assimilated some bacteria living on this plant, which gives him the advantage about not dying when he is eating this bush. But then you can wonder, like, where does this microbiota comes first? And this is very diverse. We know that this is influenced by many aspects of our lifestyle, but it comes first at birth, when your microbiome is seeded, when the mother gives birth. And this is also the case in animals, and in animals, this can have a very important role, very vital, in this case, the transmission of bacteria. Because if you look at koalas, for instance, they will do coprophagy, they will eat the feces of their parents to get the bacteria which will allow them to survive by eating eucalyptus leaves. Otherwise, they would not be able to digest these leaves. So we get the microbiota from our environment, from the food we eat. This can be transmitted through generations, and this is really a very important survival advantage when you look at the scientific perspective, that we are living in synergy with microbes, and that these microbes can come from the food we eat. And when you look at how this can be shaped in life, I think one important fact to know is that also when you are disturbing this equilibrium of transmitting the microbiome of the mother at birth, you can be predisposed to develop some disease. And this is why some babies which are born by C-section, they have different microbiota and they have more immune problems. They will be more prone to have allergies, asthma, or diarrhea when they are young in life. Of course, when you have this, it doesn't doom you to have this type of problems, but this is like a bad card that you have in your toolbox. But like I was saying, the microbiome is coming from the food you eat, and actually there's really a lot of evidence about why this is important, and it's because having from the soil to the plant to the gut a healthy ecosystem, you will transmit good nutrients, and our microbiome is to some extent reflective also of the health of your ecosystems. That's why people who eat plant-based diet, which are of good quality, they tend to have more diverse microbiome and more being healthy than others who don't do that. There have been some studies trying to quantify actually how much is this importance, and looking at the diversity of the human microbiome and the diversity of the food microbiome, we know that it's about 3% of our microbiome at a given time, which is coming from the food. 3%, this doesn't seem much when you think about it, but actually we have thousands of bacteria which come from different origins in the gut, and 3%, this is actually a number which can make a difference. I will jump a bit on the topic of pesticides because this has been also my topic of research, and we heard about the importance of Demeter agriculture for nutritional quality. And actually, when you look at the effects of pesticides on the microbiome, this is a very important topic because as a toxicologist, I can tell you that none of the chemicals which are in our environment, which are in our food, plastics or whatever, they are not evaluated for their effect on the microbiome. And when you test pesticides which are supposed to be safe, like glyphosate, maybe they will not be toxic so much for human cells, but actually they will act like antibiotics in the human gut microbiome and deplete some of the good bacteria. And this is something very important to know, that in our food chain, we have also a lot of contaminants which can affect our microbiome. And that's why when you are looking at organic fruits and vegetables, they are also affected by pesticide, and this is why organic fruits and vegetables have a better microbiome. And there was a study on apples which was done comparing organic and conventional apple, and it was found that organic apples have a more diverse microbiome than conventional apple, and they have a microbiome which is more closely connected to what is known to be a healthy microbiome in humans, which explains also why, in this case, from the agriculture, from the mode of cultivation that we use, spraying pesticides or not, having a soil which is rich and fertile or not, then you can influence the microbiome of the food you eat and then your microbiome and your health downstream. I've done a study on the topic looking at wine. We have compared the profiles of different wines. Either they were cultivated in the organic sector, most of them were Demeter, and we compare natural wines by taking also their closest neighbor, trying to identify what would be the best match of grape, the same year of cultivation, so that we compare the microbiomes of bottles of wine. And we could see that the microbiome of natural wines are much more diverse and also reflective of human health, human good health, because in these natural wines, we could identify a lot of bacteria which are known to be probiotics. We did the same type of analysis also on the kombucha that we have at the clinic, and actually these same types of bacteria which are known to be associated to good health are also present, which shows that fermented food are really good for our gut microbiome because this is a common theme that we have evolved in the history of humanity eating fermented food because it was always not always available to have methods to cook the food, to store the food. They were fermenting naturally, and it was spontaneously discovered that we digest more easily this food. And actually, this is why we have evolved with all these bacteria, and that's why we find yeast from bread, beer, which are the same than the one we have in our gut. And sometimes some doctors will tell you after a diarrhea, you can take some yeast because it will help you. And this is the same microorganism from the food to the gut. This is an overview of what it can be also at an ecosystem level, because in this case, the bridge between soil health and human health is not just about some healthy bacteria. You can also influence antibiotic resistance. You can influence plant pathogens. And so we always have to think about this at really an ecosystem level. Now I will talk about fasting and human health in particular, and starting by the fact that if you look at what the microbiome can do, it can actually make you fat. This was discovered in a study about 10 years ago, and they found that if you look at twins, they have the same genetics. Sometimes they are living together, and sometimes one is obese, the other one is not affected by obesity. And if you take the microbiome of the obese person and transfer it in a mouse, a laboratory animal, you can transfer the obesity. If you take the microbiome of the lean person, the same mouse will not become obese. And so when you look at that, you can think, okay, this is really a problem. Of course, it can be a problem for human beings, but if you look at wildlife, we have a different perspective, because animals in the wild, they are cycling in their feeding behavior. Many animals are hibernating. In this time, they are fasting. This is the case of bear. And if you look at the microbiome of the bear, it will switch composition between summer and winter. In the summer, the bear needs to eat a lot. It's an advantage to eat a lot, to become obese, so that it can survive the winter. And in the summer, the bear has the microbiome of an obese person, because it's a selective advantage. And actually, in this case, this is us which are maladapted to our environment and our food by eating 4 to 6 meals a day without any interruption. And this is why when you restore this circadian rhythm, you can also regain health. And in the winter, the bear is switching his microbiome composition to something which is more protective. It's actually protecting its immune system. It's actually protecting its muscle mass. And it's very close to the microbiome of a fasting person. This is what we discovered when we did a study on humans which were fasting here at the clinic, 10 days of fasting. We looked at their gut microbiome, and we could see also the same switch in composition. We identified that basically when you are fasting, the bacteria which use fibers as a source of energy, which are really feeding from your diet, they tend to decrease in numbers. And this is the same that you can see in wild animals. This is something which is restored at the food reintroduction. One also of the reason why the food reintroduction is very important, because if you deplete your microbiome during fasting, switching into this protective mode, you create also a window of opportunity to feed your microbiome with healthy food and healthy microbes when you are breaking your fast. This is one type of bacteria in your gut microbiome during fasting. The other type of bacteria, these are the bacteria which use your mucus or your intestinal cells as a source of energy and which will grow during fasting. And these are the ones which are known to have protective effects for your immune system. And this is exactly the same ones which will be overabundant in the gut microbiome of a bear during the hibernation. You can see it here. This is when you are looking on the left panel at the bacteria, like it's in pink, which are growing a lot during fasting. You can't read the small characters here, but basically this bacteria is becoming dominant in the microbiome of fasting humans when you look at their composition. And if you look at the bear, on the left side of the panel with all the bars, you have a lot of pink as well, because this is the winter season, and this is when this type of bacteria is also very abundant and protecting bear from pathogens and also helping him to keep its muscle mass. There's actually some really elegant studies showing that if you are not losing muscle mass during fasting, there's a couple of reasons for that, but one of these is that we might be helped also by our gut microbiota, which can recycle the product of our metabolism to make new bricks for our system to be kept in good shape. We looked at microbiomes in our clinic, not just looking at the gut microbiome, but also looking at oral microbiome. And we started doing that because we know that bad breath is quite a common side effect of a fasting cure. And we were wondering, is it actually because you are in ketosis, using fat as a source of energy, or maybe for other reasons? And so we collaborated with some colleagues from the University of Geneva to understand how the oral microbiome, so the bacteria that you have in your mouth, around your teeth, are changing during fasting. And we discovered that actually we have also a shift in microbiota composition when you are fasting in your oral cavity. And some of these bacteria, they will be more prone to fermentation, doing fermentations of amino acid, and this is why they would cause more production of sulfurous compound. And to cut it short, if you have symptoms of bad breath during long-term fasting, this is not necessarily because your metabolism is turning to ketosis, but it's because also you have bacteria in your mouth which can produce these compounds. But actually, when we looked at the change in oral microbiota during fasting, we can see that there are actually lots of changes which can be positive. We looked at one of the bugs which are known to be associated to disease, periodontitis. This is when your teeth are becoming loose and you have inflammation. And actually one of the bacteria which is the most known to be responsible for periodontitis, it is decreased by fasting. And when we looked 1 month, 3 months later, it was still decreased compared to baseline. And these bacteria, we tried to connect the dot also. When it decreases with fasting, is inflammation decreasing as well? We proved that. We looked at inflammation during fasting in the oral cavity, and we could see that it is decreased. And this explained a lot of clinical observations that we have, that fasting can be also a very powerful tool for oral health. Jumping again back to the food, what can influence the microbiota? I was telling you about the bacteria which are on the food, but this is the food itself. So I want to give you a short summary of the main aspects of this. And first, what is the most important? This is fibers. Fibers, they are commonly known to be in fruits and vegetables, but not only, they are in whole grain product, and they can feed the good bugs in your gut, and this can produce anti-inflammatory effect, which explain why when you have diets which are rich in plants, they have good health effects. This is not just because you have good nutrient reaching your bloodstream, but also because you are feeding your bacteria with good food. Polyphenols are also a very important part of a healthy diet, healthy also for the microbiome, because when you look at these fruits which are rich in colors like blueberries, they have polyphenols like anthocyanins, which they will not act on your cells. They will act on the microbiota, and in return, you can see that they will increase markers of good health when you are looking at a randomized control trial at what blueberries can do. You can see that an intervention can improve vascular function, can improve cognitive performance. And this is through the microbiome, because if you deplete the microbiome, this is not possible in humans easily, but this has been done in mice. You remove the good health effect of this type of diet. Fermented food are always also a way to have a rich and diverse microbiome. And this is because in fermented food, you have all these supplements that we see on the market. The prebiotics, the probiotics, the symbiotics, all these biotics that you can put in a pill, they are actually in a living ecosystem, which explains why they are in general much more powerful than if you are taking a supplement. And to bring back the picture to the soil, actually, when you look at the human gut microbiome, you can really compare it to a garden where you try to grow some good food, because in a garden where you are trying to grow some food, you can plant the best seed. They will not grow in a soil which is devastated by pesticides, which is infertile. And this is exactly the same for the gut microbiome. When you have a flourishing gut ecosystem, it can be devastated by antibiotics, by poor diet. And in this case, you can have pathogens which will develop. And if you are actually feeding your inner garden with whole food and the right food for your microbiome, you can really build resilience. And this is really a tool for having sustainable health. And the word sustainable is very important. I want to echo to the presentation of Françoise about fasting as a medicine which is sustainable. I always like to bring back this picture, because we are in a world where we have to think about the future. We have to think about planetary resilience. We have to think about what the substance we use in our life are doing, whether it's impact on climate change or impact in the environment. And when you compare fasting as a non-pharmacological approach among many other non-pharmacological approaches to conventional medicine, you can really see that we are missing the point by just looking at drugs to cure ourselves, because non-pharmacological intervention like fasting, they are really a sustainable way. They are energy efficient because they don't use fossil fuels to make drugs, develop complex processes which are done at the other side of the planet, and you need to bring them to Europe. And actually, this is really an ecological approach which is compatible with planetary resilience. So that's why when we think about what we transmit to our patients, it's not just to empower them to live a healthy life. Everyone is running after longevity, like if it's just the point about growing old and growing a long life old. But actually, we should live a healthy life which is also fulfilling and which also is sustainable, because this is what we need to ensure the future of other generations. So thank you for your attention.